We have a specific. Did you start recording, Phyllis?
I did.
Okay, all right. To ensure safety and respect, we ask everyone to silence their cell phones. Okay, put your cell phone on mute. We ask that we have a list in terms of how you speak, and you put one finger up if you want to get on the list and wave it around so that I can see it. Okay, make it known. Okay, then we also have two fingers if you want to ask a clarifying question of the speaker, and I'll get back to that later. So you raise one finger if you want to get on the list. Please take 2 minutes, okay? I am going to have a little timer on where you're going to be able to hear the little bell go off if at the 2-minute mark, okay? Be respectful, do not interrupt the speaker. The point of the discussion is to listen and learn and not argue. Okay, a clarifying question. If you wish to ask a clarifying question of the speaker, you raise two fingers, and the clarifying question should consist of, I did not understand what you meant by, or could you please clarify further what you meant, or explain further what you meant by your comment of such and such. Okay. Okay, 15 minutes before the end of the meeting is for an hour and a half to 11:30, but 15 minutes before, we will have a wrap up of your final thoughts. Please take 1 minute to express your final thoughts. If you haven't spoken at all during the meeting, please take the full 2 minutes, okay? Then we're going to have, I'm gonna go around and ask everyone to introduce themselves. And then I will introduce the reason that I brought the topic. The last thing is that I want to tell you is that at any time, I can raise my finger. There's no crosstalk, but I can raise my finger and say point of order, which means all talking ceases. Okay, to bring order back to the meeting, because sometimes it does get heated. Okay. All right, so let's start with our introductions. Did I miss anything, Phyllis?
You were going to go back to something?
No, I did. It was the clarifying questions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, explain them a little bit further. Okay, Phyllis.
Hi, I'm Phyllis. I've been coming to Erace since 2008, and I'm looking forward to this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. Marva. Unmute yourself.
Good morning. My name is Marva. I've been coming post Katrina and always something to learn new. I enjoy the meeting.
Thank you. Marion.
I'm Marion Lagarde. I've been attending Erace since 1993, and I'm looking forward to this morning's discussion.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
I'm Bill Ives, and I've been coming to Erace for 3 or 4 years. I don't know exactly. And I look forward to them. It's one of the highlights of the week, and I learn something every time.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Shelley?
Hi, I'm Shelley. I attended one Erace meeting 3 years ago when I was visiting Nancy, who was my sister-in-law. I'm coming to you from Rock Island, Illinois. I appreciate the invitations. I do receive the emails for invitations. I always forget or something came up, but I thought this would be a good time to jump in. So it's good to see some of you who I did meet 3 years ago, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Okay, appreciate it. Lynn? Lynn? There you go.
Sorry, trying to unmute. Good morning. I'm Lynn Frank, back after a bit of an absence. I actually had to do some tours. My retirement job is tour guide, and I had some tours that happened on Saturday, as well as a house guest. It's good to see you again.
Good. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
Cindy?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Cindy Morse, long retired kindergarten teacher. So this is different kind of play, but it's valuable. I find it educational and interesting. Thank you.
Michelle? Michelle, you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. I had to reset my microphone, unplug it and to get it to work. Now you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Michelle, and I've been coming to Erace since the end of last summer, and I am actually coming to you from Austin, Texas, which is where Louise Johnson, who just joined the meeting, is as well. She introduced me to Erace last year, so I enjoyed the conversations as well, and I look forward to today's. Thank you.
Thank you. Louise?
Hi, sorry, I've been having some internet problems, so I might suddenly disappear. I don't know. It seems to be okay thus far. I've been coming for over 20 years. Used to be in New Orleans, and then since Katrina, we moved to Austin, and I've been joining since then.
Okay, thank you, Louise. Pedro, we're skipping over Glenn because he asked to be skipped over, so. Pedro?
Yeah, hey, good morning. I'm Pedro in Austin as well, with my friends Michelle and Louise. Been coming to Erace for almost a year. I guess it started late last summer. Really appreciate the discussions, the insights, the experiences that are shared by all of the members. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay. The reason that I brought this topic, May 31st and June 1st was the 100th year anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre. And throughout the last weekend, I probably watched 4 documentaries about the Tulsa Massacre. It was a very disheartening experience for me I needed to know, I wanted to know what happened. The documentaries were very good. They explained the circumstances and everything that led into what happened in Tulsa, and how Tulsa came to be the Black Wall Street, and then also the resentment felt by the white community, which led to the ultimate massacre. But I wanted to talk about it, but I just didn't want to just come in here and talk about the facts. I wanted to talk about the things that contributed to it, but also there were 2 things that I took away from that. One was the media's role, which this article is about. And I found a much larger article, which I can put in the chat, that talked about how the media and the sensationalizing of these little trivial events of a man stepping onto an elevator and tripping and stepping on a woman's foot became sensationalized into what instigated, the massacre, the reasons, how the media sensationalized it. But the media had been doing that if you look up race massacres, there's probably about 30 of them that occurred between 1915 and the 1950s, between the lynchings and the burning of Black businesses and Black sections of the city. I mean, it was a very common thing to have been done, sadly to say. But anyway, I brought this article so that we could talk about the media's role in the cause and effect of the media. So that's why I brought it. And I hope we get a good discussion out of it. So the list is open. Phyllis.
Well, I want to first of all say I'm so annoyed all the time when there's some white woman, poor little victim, um, who starts it all. It just is very annoying to me. And there's a quote I discovered recently by Ida B. Wells, who was a Black female journalist. And I really love it. It says, if Southern white men are not careful, they will overreach themselves and public sentiment will have a reaction. A conclusion will then be reached, which will be very damaging to the moral reputation of their women. And I think a lot of those cases, the white woman was actually probably involved in a relationship or had some other role in it. It seems like from this article that Dick Rowland and Sarah Page might have been in a relationship. But that doesn't matter to the white dudes who are just racist and also having economic resentment. So I just want to put that out there to start. Yeah, it makes white women look bad when this happens, and it's an excuse used by racists that white women also play into. Thank you. I'll get back on the list later.
Thank you. Shelley? Unmute.
Okay, so yes, I wrote down that, as Nancy said, the media has been
Bill?
sensationalizing race relationships from the beginning of race. There was some kind of media apparatus that set the narrative. They set the narrative for the Tulsa situation from the beginning by calling it the Tulsa Riots. And so for years, people have referred to what happened in Tulsa as a riot, which and words matter, and that's where the media comes in. We use words that mean something. And so when you talk about riots, you're talking about, usually when there's a riot and there are Black people involved, the connotation is that the Black people started the riot, or that two sides were rioting, as if there were equal power for each side, given to each side, that each side carries the same power when they don't. And so there is an intentional use of words when you call it riot. And I remember for years knowing about this, and I would hear Black people say or read Black journalists and other people who would say, why are they calling it riot when it was a massacre? But the riot thing prevailed, that name prevailed for years and years. And that echoes and resonates with the people who read it, who hear it. And then Phyllis had said something about being annoyed at, am I wrong?
Shelley, would you like to get back on the list?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Oh, that would be two.
Okay. The list is open. Bill, I think Bill is next.
Yeah, To put it in context, Oklahoma is one of the most racist states in the country. It was settled by poor white farmers from the deep South who didn't have any land and wanted to go and take land away from the indigenous people, and which they did. And the amount of land the indigenous people had shrank and shrank and shrank. And so these people were incredibly racist. I know this firsthand because I'm ashamed to say, well, I was born in Oklahoma, but I left when I was 6 months old. However, I have many relatives in Oklahoma, and I spent a lot of time in my childhood in Oklahoma. And so it's not surprising that this mob acted the way it did. How much time do I have?
50 seconds.
Okay, then the other thing is that, as Nancy said, this was not isolated incident. A lot of the mobs were actually overthrowing legitimate government. That was the case in Colfax, Louisiana. Whites contested the results of the 72 election, and the state militia was mostly black at the time, and they tried to protect the local government, and they were surrounded by a white mob that set the courthouse on fire and shot anyone who emerged. It's estimated about 40 blacks were killed. Sounds like January 6th on steroids. And then in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898, there was a coup d'etat of the black government that was lawfully elected. White supremacists overthrew it and killed dozens of black people.
Yes. We finished, Bill? You like to get back on
Yeah.
the list? Okay.
I want to hear some other people. I will get back on the list.
Okay. Shelley. Anybody else?
Okay, so going back to what I thought I heard Phyllis stated that she was annoyed at the whole narrative around white women as victims. Was that accurate? Kind of, sort of, okay.
I'll answer when I get on the list again.
Okay. And also stating that there were times when they were probably in relationship with these black men and that. And I think that, and I read the same thing. It was either in this article or another article about Tulsa and other things, because I have been annoyed as well. Yesterday and the day before, as I was reading some more of these articles, I am very annoyed myself at white women being placed as the center of all of this discussion from the beginning of time, from the beginning of slaves being brought to America, being used as chattel, that the white women were elevated, had been elevated to this hierarchy of beauty, of everything, that they must be protected and shielded, and black women in particular were placed on a very lower rung. There was no contest in terms of who was beautiful and who needed to be protected, and black women never have been. So I have been very annoyed since yesterday. I was trying to figure out what I could write about this whole topic, because all of my life, and I'm 66, all of my life, having to consider that this whole group of white women are somehow better than all the black women whom I have known since birth, and girls and all of that. And so,
Shelley, would you like to get back on the list?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we have Phyllis and then Bill. Would someone else like to get on the list? Marion. Phyllis.
Nancy, I put in the chat that Leonetta had her hand up
Oh,
virtually.
okay.
So, yeah, Shelley, I think when I say annoyed, it almost seems like too not strong enough a word. I mean, I don't appreciate or buy into the idea of white women as some virtuous, delicate flowers who must be protected from any man, but especially Black men. I don't think, I think it's a false narrative made by racist white men that white women who are also racist buy into. And it needs to stop because it still goes on, absolutely still goes on, that kind of idea. I wanted to also refer to what Shelley said about the media trying to say when it's like a riot, it's almost like they say race riot. The assumption is that the Black people are the one rioting. But I would say, for instance, with the protests after George Floyd, people would refer to things as riots. And when really the rioters were the cops. They're the ones who instigated. The cops were doing the rioting, but everybody who's conservative and thinks that Portland is in flames right now, which it is definitely not, that somehow that was the left wing or the progressive people who are out there protesting. And the same narrative is used with the Palestinians as if they are an equal foe to the Israeli military complex, which is false. And yes, I worked that in because that's what I do. So I hope that clarifies what I was saying. Like I said yesterday, it was a rough day. So that's it for now, Nancy. I'll
Okay.
get on the list.
Thank you.
Later.
All right, we have Bill, Marion, Leonetta, and then Shelley again. Does anyone else like to be on the list? Okay, Bill.
I really liked the fact that you chose the role of the media. And I remember reading that prior to the Civil War, newspapers all over the Deep South had pro-slavery editorials and, fanning the fears of low-income whites. But, as we sadly know, this is still going on. And there was a quote in the article. It says, "When it came to race and segregation, the world took an independent view to avoid upsetting the locals." And recently, Surrey County, North Carolina, their board of community board banned the use of Coca-Cola because, and quote, "Our board felt that was the best way to take a stand and express our disappointment in Coca-Cola's actions, which were not representative of most views of our citizens," end quote. So I guess these guys are fine with giving up Coke in order to prevent Black people from voting. And I saw another article just today that there was a white veteran who was talking about the role of Blacks in the creation of Memorial Day, and he was an older white guy, and as soon as he started about that, his mic was cut off, so he couldn't speak. So we just see all of this pro white supremacy stuff in the media. We have a war in the media of right-wing journalism and progressive journalism, and this is one of the main battlefronts in that war.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Next, we have Marion, Leonetta, and then Shelley. And then Phyllis.
I would just like to say how I've always been appalled, angry is more like it, that several centuries ago, there were people who believed that they could cross an ocean and kidnap people from their homeland, bring them back across that same ocean in chains, and treat them as subhumans, and then be appalled at the fact that these people would actually rise up, complain, revolt about how they were being treated, demand rights as human beings, because they were human beings. And the only thing that they could, the oppressors could say, well, because you have a darker complexion than I have, I am going to treat you worse than you treat a dog. And even animals have rights. You'd have, in some instances, if you mistreat an animal, you have to pay a fine, and perhaps, considering the extent of the misery you impose on this creature, you'd go to jail in some instances. But yet you would drag human beings across an ocean in chains and expect them not to complain about it. I don't know when this is ever going to end. I sometimes think, and I've had discussions with family members and a couple of friends about, is this ever going to end? Can we ever get past this idiocy of thinking that the color of a person's skin should determine how they be treated? And I think this was just an excuse that these people were looking for, any excuse to
Okay,
destroy this community.
okay. Thank you, Marion. We have Leonetta, Shelley, and Phyllis. Anyone else? Okay, Leonetta. And Lynn? Okay. Leonetta? Leonetta, are you there? Okay,
She needs to unmute.
Leonetta, unmute. Okay, well, Leonetta, maybe when you come back, but next we'll move on to Shelley. Unmute.
So, so getting back to, and the reason why I want to continue to talk about white women is because the media also helps set that narrative. There are no facets of, in my opinion, there are no parts of and facets of this discussion about racism back then that the media did not help move forward. So they helped set the narrative that white women had to be protected from Black men. They also helped set the narrative that Black women deserved none of that treatment, because white men from the beginning raping and pillaging Black women and could not even be prosecuted. So while they continue to set that whole narrative about white women. And then getting back to what you had mentioned about, or this was Phyllis, had mentioned something about earlier about sometimes they were in relationship with the white women, were relationship with the white men, Black men. That may have been so. However, that continues the narrative, because that, knowing that a white woman would be in relationship with a Black man only further incensed white men. So it doesn't help that that may have been true. It's just they set the framework, and I think that saying that they were offhandedly saying that they were could have been in a relationship just furthers that narrative.
Okay, thank you. I have Louise and then Cindy.
I'm unmuted now. This is
Okay,
Lynetta.
all right, Lynetta.
I was trying to unmute and I couldn't. I'm on my phone. I'm multitasking. Sorry.
All right, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to share with everybody. I don't know if everybody on the call knows my family history with this topic. Black men and white women. I've had two incidents in my family with that. I've had a male relative to had gotten lynched behind that, and I also had an uncle to have his. This happened in the 70s. He was a principal of a school, and his wife, which is my aunt, was a school teacher, and this happened in the 70s in a parish called East Feliciana Parish. His son was dating a white woman, and the school board called a meeting and told him that if they did not end the relationship, that they would lose their jobs. And it created a whole lot of tension in the family. And when I watched this, what happened in Tulsa, now I understand why my older relatives, my older family members, felt the way they did, because me and my cousins, we couldn't understand what was the big to do, about it. But
Clarifying.
now I know what danger my family was in. My aunt and my uncle was in with losing their jobs, and maybe even worse if that relationship didn't end. And also, I just wanted to make a comment. I think I read it in this article, maybe it's something else, that I found that uh, th- when Oklahoma was a territory, that the Indians that were Native Americans that were there, they owned slaves, and when they gave the Indians land, their slaves became free, and they also received land. And I was shocked to see that. And Bill, I do know that Oklahoma is one of the racist states in the country. They have a history of it, worse than
Mhm.
Alabama and Georgia.
Okay, Glenn has a clarifying question, Leonetta.
Okay.
Go ahead, Glenn. Unmute. You have to unmute.
I changed it to where I just want to be on the list.
You
Okay.
want to
All
be
right.
on the list now, Glenn?
Yeah.
Okay, well, then we have Phyllis, Lynn, Louise, Cindy, and then Glenn. Phyllis and
Um,
Bill.
okay, I have so many notes. I can't pinpoint when I first heard about the Tulsa Massacre. And of course, when I first heard about it, it was called the Tulsa Race Riots. Um, Possibly around the time I saw the movie Rosewood, I may have become aware of it back in the 90s, I guess, maybe before that. Um, but I definitely didn't know the story about the young man stepping on the woman's foot and all that happened after that. Um, but in the last couple years, two TV shows, The Watchmen and Lovecraft Country, both dealt with the Tulsa Tulsa Race Massacre, um, and really effectively, and provided a lot of education that I think a lot of Americans didn't have yet. Um, and I think those were well timed to lead up to the 100th anniversary. Um, there is a podcast I listen to by two African American sisters, Adrienne Marie Brown and her sister Autumn. If you don't know Adrienne Marie Brown, you should look her up and follow her. She's really amazing. It's called How to Survive the End of the World. And in the last one, they were talking about, they have great speculations for the future of how to change the structure of our society and yada yada. One of their comments was about securing land and building communities, and I think that not necessarily only African American communities, but building communities of like-minded people. And when they said that, I actually got afraid for them because of this history of white people becoming jealous whenever a community of color is able to achieve what white racists think that only white people should have access to. So I support them doing it. It just made me anxious that there would still be people who would want to cause them harm. So
Thank you, Phyllis.
thanks.
Lynn?
I noticed in the article that the Tulsa newspaper, one of the Tulsa newspapers, was actually probably supporting a lynching, that they wanted that man to be lynched, the one who had been arrested for stepping on her foot. Now, the microfilm and the physical evidence of the article have all disappeared, but there was
Interesting.
the belief that they had promoted a lynching. It's a popular thing to do back then, to give a warning to Black people to stay in their place. And it brings to mind all this legislation in right-wing states, Republican states. Well, we're not going to teach critical race theory. So let's not have the information we need to make our country less racist. Let's pretend that we have a glorious heritage and that's all there is to it. So knowledge is an effective way to improve the situation, but Republicans don't want knowledge in people's hands. That's all.
Thank you, Lynn. Next, we have Louise.
Well, just to reiterate what Lynn just said, actually, like those headlines were, I mean, outrageous. And they definitely stirred that and created that massacre. And again, as she said, that all of that stuff, the microfilms, they've all been, you know, buried. They're not, you know, they don't exist. They tried to just completely stomp on any of this history that had happened, and which makes me very happy that it actually came to light now and people are talking about it. I've first heard about a couple of years ago. I first heard about it, and this is, you know, at least it's out there in the open. People are talking about it and they're outraged that it happened, but it's more outrageous that people try to suppress it. On a very sweet and beautiful note, though, I'd like to mention that over 100 years ago, you know, let's go back 100 years ago, the fact that a Black person and a white person would want to be together against all of the horrible odds that they were, just think how strong their love must have been. Sorry, I'm a bit of a romantic, and it's just like, how lovely must their love be to go through that, you know, in the face of lynching, death, whatever is to face them. And I just think that's a beautiful thing.
Shelley. Okay, thank you, Louise. Next we have, well, this is who on the list. We have Cindy, Glenn, Bill, Shelley. Does anyone else want to be on the list? Okay, Cindy, take it away. Unmute.
On it.
There we
All
go.
of us have this little reaction that takes an extra second to get it done. I grew up in the South, in the Carolinas mostly, Virginia. But my whole life, I've heard this myth of the sexual prowess of Black men. And I believe that myth, which I have no idea where it started, but it's the basic fear of the white, quote, power structure, which is really not the power structure that it might want to be. I think that's the basis of it, that they feel inferior. And whether it's in the sexual realm or just in general, they have to keep it pressed down in order to stay on top, which is really sad. it'd be interesting to find out if there's any understanding of where that idea came from. But it certainly was widespread everywhere I've lived, mostly in the South. Now, I don't remember it in upstate New York, but I think that's a major basis. Fear. Enough
Okay.
said.
Thank you, Cindy. Next we have Glenn.
First of all, I'd like to talk about the myth of the white man protecting the white woman. That's a myth.
Oh, right.
Because if you look at history, he made laws to suppress the white woman. The white woman couldn't even be a school teacher in America. If you go back in history, there would only be men be called schoolmasters. And if a white man would rape a white woman, she wouldn't get any justice in court. And there were laws, if she got a divorce, she couldn't get the children. She could only leave the house with the clothing on her back. And as far as protecting her virtue, he has put her naked on the screen. And even today, we have the Me Too movement, where these white women were raped by these moguls. It's all the myth that he put that he cared for and protected the white woman. I've just named some examples. I can keep going on and on, example after example. But now I'm gonna change to the race on the in Oklahoma. When I say, how much time I got left?
15 seconds. You want to get back on the list?
Back on the list. Put me back.
There you go. All right. All right, thank you, Glenn. We have Bill, Shelley, Phyllis, and then Glenn again. Anyone else like to be on the list? Okay, Bill.
Just to confirm what I said about Oklahoma, it's more racist than a lot of the Deep South because the people who went to Oklahoma were the rednecks and the racists. And so it was intensified. But what I really wanted to say, I was reading here, they found the public were, I'm quoting from the article, they found the riot a public relation nightmare. It's what's best forgotten, something to be swept beneath history's carpet. And the January 6th insurrection was just a continuation of white racist mobs having a riot or a massacre. And it was ironic that many of the police, but certainly not all of them, police officers, Capitol Police, were African Americans. One that the biggest hero was the one who led rioters away from the thing, from the Congress. So what's happening now? All of the Republicans are trying to sweep the insurrection under the rug. They're trying to say, oh, it's no big deal. It was just like tourists coming to the Capitol. And this is like just deja vu. It's the same reaction that happened to all of these is still happening today. And we're still having these race riots today. Race riots is a bad term. It's white supremacy massacres or white supremacy insurrection is the more proper term. So anyway, I was just struck by the parallels to this action, to what's happening still today. Thank you, Nancy, for the article.
And you timed it perfectly, Bill. Okay, Shelley is next. Unmute.
I'm gonna have to leave right after I'm finished
Okay.
with this, so I'm just going to make some points very quickly. in response to something that Louise had stated. Is it Louise? Yeah. And she said that the love between Black men and white women, how it was a beautiful thing that they loved each other in the face of all of this. I had a visceral reaction to that. I guess I don't care about that being a beautiful thing, because I have to say that it was a beautiful thing for Black love to prevail, given the circumstances from slavery until that particular time, when Black men actually could not protect their women because of the racism. So if a Black woman were violated, if they were violated, there wasn't much that there was nothing that a Black man could do. So I would be more inclined to say that Black love between a Black woman and a Black man, that was the beautiful thing, that could prevail and that could overcome all of these situations that were dangerous. And then Cynthia mentioned the fear of the Black man's sexual prowess. And where did that come from? I guess I'm more inclined to group that into going back to the media and all of the people. My question was that an actual belief, or was it another tactic to inflame other whites for the value of whites, to keep white supremacy going? Was that an actual belief, or was it something, or was that an idea that was planted so that to further inflame racism? And Glenn had said that there was a myth of protecting white women. I'm only going to say that I vehemently disagree with that. It wasn't a myth. It's not a myth now. It's not a myth today. Sure, we live in a patriarchal society where we could put all women down on a bottom tier, but white women had been used from the beginning to be that particular person who had to, and they were used in order to further inflame racial insensibilities or sensibilities, and to continue this whole myth. So having said that, thank you very much for having me. And
Glenn has a clarifying question. Could he just ask you that before you leave?
Sure.
Glenn? You already? No, you just muted yourself. Go back. There you go.
Shelley, I like to ask you, was the white woman protected from the white man?
Oh, absolutely not. There you go.
Okay, so were they protected from the white man? Was that the question?
Yes.
I would say in a patriarchal society, as I said, white men ruled everything and everyone. Sure that and sure white women were placed on in a realm where they couldn't do this, that, and the other. Of course, that's a no-brainer. But in terms of them holding white women up as virtuous people who had to be protected from Black people and Black men, yes.
What I mean is, was she protected from rape from the white man? And was the white society going to protect her from being raped by a white man?
Well, you see, I'm not focusing on that so much as what the to bring value to the conversation about how the media uses those kinds of words and situations. I'm talking about how the media used white women and how white men used white women to be put on a pedestal, to be protected by Black men, to further the myth that they were animals. That was my point of view. So I would have to disagree that I'm going to say again that was not a myth, that they did actually do that. So bye all.
Okay, well, thank you, Shelley. Hope to see you again, okay? All right, next we have on the list Phyllis and then Glenn. Does anyone else want to get on the list? Okay, Phyllis.
Well, I'm sorry Shelley had to leave because she's making this a great conversation. So tell her that, Nancy.
Okay.
When, I don't know, at some point I wrote down, maybe when Cindy was talking, never underestimate the insecurity of a white man. That's all I'll say to that. So I won't go on. I want to say the Me Too movement was actually started by Tarana Burke, who's an African-American woman, and it was for all women, not just white women, to, when it first started, all the Me Too hashtags, I don't know if any woman I know didn't hashtag it, or there were a lot. Some probably didn't because they were wanting to be private, but it's a pandemic of how women are molested and abused in our society from birth to death. It is a thing. All women. What else did I write down? Yeah, I think under patriarchy, no woman is safe from anybody. And I get what Louise was saying. I'm kind of a romantic too, and love is love and all that. I believe all that. However, in the case, maybe not so much now in places like New Orleans or Austin, but in rural places, when there's a white woman with a Black man, the Black man is taking a lot more risk than the white woman is. She's taking some risk. And I can say when I was growing up, I remember having a belief that there was a certain kind of white woman who was with a Black man. And that got busted one day. I worked at a public library. And you know what I mean by a certain kind of white woman, kind of poor white trash, whatever. A couple, a Black man and a white woman, were going up the escalator. And she did not fit the physical stereotype of poor white trash. She was wearing a cute little floral dress. She had her hair really nice. And I literally was like, oh, well, I guess that's not true. In that moment, I was like, stereotype gone, and it never came back. So I think that was an amazing moment that I can actually remember something being just blown out of my mind. I heard the alarm. Sorry for over talking.
It's okay. Okay, we don't have a lot of people on the list and still have quite a bit of time left. So next we have Glenn. Does anyone else like to get on the list? Bill. Okay, Glenn and then Bill. Glenn, take it away.
The prosperity of the African Americans in Oklahoma. More African Americans need to pay attention.
Too.
Well, I'm hearing a lot of echo in the background.
Yeah.
So a lot of African Americans need to pay more attention of that prosperity than they're paying attention to the riot. How they were able to achieve what they achieved without government help. In fact, with government working against them, how they achieved such prosperity. Now, I got a big argument last week by saying, we had to pull ourselves up by our own bootstrap. That's an example of someone pulling themselves up by their bootstrap. Not the way y'all took it. Somebody actually laying on the ground and buying a boot from a boot store and pulling themselves up. The boot is only an allegorical. Bootstrap is only allegorical, a symbolic, talking about something high. Pulling yourself up by your own resources. That's what they pull themselves up, but their own resource. And that's a message that we should be taking today about pulling ourselves up by our own resources, of which we have plenty of. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Francis, I have you. Okay, we have Bill, Phyllis, and then Francis and Michelle. Okay, all right.
When I first learned about the Tulsa race massacre 5 or 6 years ago, spending a lot of time in Oklahoma in the 50s as a child, I never saw a black person. And Cleveland County had a sunset law. That's where the University of Oklahoma was that I spent most of my time. And the next time, and you know, no colored person can spend the night in Cleveland County. The Navy took them down. I've mentioned that before. And I discovered in reading about this that there was a vibrant black community both in Tulsa and Oklahoma City. And then I realized, well, it makes sense because at the time, kind of in the end of Reconstruction, there were black communities all over the South that were thriving. And Oklahoma was opening up as a land of opportunities for non-Indigenous people. And so it would make sense that blacks would migrate to Oklahoma and form vibrant communities. But I want to say two things quickly. We were talking about the inability of black men to protect their women. The opening scene of The Butler. How many people have seen The Butler? Yeah. And the young man who became the butler witnessed the white overseer taking his mother into the shed to rape her. And then when her husband objected, the white man turned around and shot him dead. And that was the opening scene of that movie. And it really was it's true life. I don't know if that happened, but I imagine it did. I'm sure it happened all over the South. And the last thing is, we were talking about white men abusing white women. And my daughter was in Mongolia in the Peace Corps, and my younger daughter went to see her, and they were traveling all around Mongolia. And I said, well, were you concerned, two young women traveling around Mongolia? And she said, oh, no. She said the Mongolians are Buddhist, and they treat women much better than Americans do. So that was just an interesting cultural comment. Anyway, I'm done.
All right, thank you, Bill. Next we have Phyllis.
So I want to remind Glenn that the original bootstrap example that was given was actually from physics. Not that you're laying on the ground, but that you're standing up in your boots and you reach down and hold on to your bootstraps. You cannot lift yourself off the ground. So the example was from physics and then was translated into this false narrative that anybody could pull themselves up. Yeah, resources are great, but that's implying that the way it's used now is that everybody has the same level of resources, which is not true. Leonetta has her hand up. And also I just started reading this book, which I could not recommend more, How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith, who grew up in New Orleans, recently got his PhD. He's like 32 years old. He's also a poet. In this book, he goes to like 9 different locations in the country and one in Africa, and he interviews people and he writes about his own experience. The first chapter is Monticello. Thomas Jefferson was a messed up human being, in my opinion. He had, besides Sally Hemings and all that, there were actually family units with last names that lived at Monticello for generations. And after his death, were sold off, apart, separated. And he also separated people during his life, mainly to pay debts, to maintain his lifestyle, to be the great man of letters that he allegedly was. So to me, he was an example, he was a metaphor for the country, that this country would not be what it is if it weren't for the labor of unpaid labor of Black people, allowing us to have the lifestyle and the power structure that we now have. Just want to finish. The second chapter is Whitney Plantation here, which some of us have been to, and there's a chapter about Angola and some other places. So it's called How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith. It just came out on June 1st. I hope it makes the New York Times bestseller list. Please consider reading it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have Francis, Michelle, and Leonetta, and I'm going to cut the list off at that, okay, and then move on to the wrap up. So Francis, you're next.
Well, what I was going to say was partially mentioned by Bill, that I read a number of articles that past several weeks, and I can't remember where I read about Black people migrating to Oklahoma, which is my home state, because of land grants, and whether that was through the tribes or through the US government, I don't know. But the Black people were entitled to land just like the natives were before statehood. And I would say to Glenn, that was part of how their wealth was built in Tulsa and why Black people were migrating to Oklahoma. What I also understood was that both the natives and the Black people did not want Oklahoma to become a state because they knew that the government would impose the Jim Crow laws on the people of the state. And so they were very disappointed when that happened. But I would say that having land was what Black people were deprived of after, and that was helped them in Tulsa build up some of the wealth that they built up. Now, correct me if that's wrong, but that was my understanding. Growing up in Muskogee, which is a stone's throw from Tulsa, I spent a lot of time in Tulsa from the time I was about 10 until I left after college. And I never heard of the massacre. I think that's pitiful. Anyone, that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you, Francis. You timed that perfectly. Okay. Michelle and then Leonetta.
Can you hear me? I'm worried
Yes.
about my microphone not working. I just wanted to add to the discussion a little bit about the media that we had started off with and the influence of the media on all of our daily lives and perceptions of things. And just to throw out there that one, we obviously are all aware of who owns the media and controls it the most, and that's white men. So there's a very good reason for why things are influenced the way they are, and I think we need to remind ourselves of that almost every day. And secondly, just a revelation for me not too long ago myself about that is that to really critically think about what we see and watch and hear every day through the media, mainly television. And it never really struck me how much of it, of the entertainment, quote unquote, we see and hear every day is at the expense of women and the victimization of women. And not just, you know, perceived violence and things like that. There's enough of that as it is, but the fact that so many shows are built on women's problems and issues. And I just finished watching the HBO limited series Mayor of Easttown, and how you think about that as being a miniseries that's built on a character of a strong woman, but the reality is that that woman's flaws and everything about her are basically the root story of what's going on. And I hadn't really thought about that as a woman until recently, about thinking about all the things over my lifetime that I've watched, and the shows and the sitcoms and the movies and the cop dramas and things like that. How much of it is just based on women being the victims or being the perceived problem of the show? And it's just mind blowing now as I look at it through that lens. So I just wanted to throw that out there for the media conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. And Michelle, you timed that perfectly too. Great. Leonetta.
Hi, I'm sorry for bringing all of this up, but what y'all there was I forgot who it was that was talking about they didn't know if that still went on or not, but I can remember a family secret that was shared at a family reunion. We had a they were sharecropping in Mississippi, and this aunt of mine was a nice looking woman, and the older would come and knock on the door. She's in the bed with her husband. It would come get her and would have sex with her. And her husband couldn't do a thing about it. They were on his land, they were sharecropping. And eventually she got pregnant. And once she had the child, her mother and everybody that was related to her that was on this man's land, they left in the middle of the night, never to come back to Mississippi again. So that's a family story that was shared at a family reunion. It was always a secret, and one one family reunion it was shared. Everybody found out this story. Why this cousin of mine doesn't look like her other siblings. And I want to also share with you what I think the reason why this myth was said about Black men were oversexed and were a threat to white women. If you can remember when the Africans were brought over here, they were just about nude when they came. And Black men, not all, but most Black men have a lot of stuff behind in their pants. And not all white men, but most white men don't. And I think that's where that started, and it got perpetuated over years and centuries. The story's gotten worse. It's probably was based on truth, and it got twisted. And I think that's where this comes from. And I think media probably got a hold to it too. So that's just my opinion about where that came from. And
Okay.
since I have I'm the last one to speak, so I don't have to speak through the round to go around. Thank you for picking the article, and that I had somewhere to talk about what I was watching on the weekend with this massacre. And I'm glad people are calling it a massacre because that's just what it was. And Glenn, they were prosperous. And it is an example of how African American people can be self-sufficient. And it's something that we need to study and try to duplicate. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Leonetta. And next we're going to go to, it's 11:11. So we're going to go to the wrap up. And for those people who haven't spoken during the main discussion time, you can pass. You don't have to say anything, but I will call on you to speak. And you can take the full 2 minutes if you choose to. So first, Pedro. Pedro. Pedro, can you hear us? I don't know what's going on, but we're going to move on to Peter. Oh,
Yeah,
there you go.
I was having trouble with my computer here. Yeah, thank you for the article. Um, I just had some comments. I guess the Tulsa Massacre to me is a microcosm of our racist society into the 21st century. Actually, it's an example of like blacks pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps, so to speak, despite the objective barriers that whites did not have to endure. And as Glenn stated, the state provided no aid, just barriers. Tulsa became what? The Black Wall Street. And what happened? It was burned to the ground by white racists. Today, as we fast forward, wealth inequality persists, and the methods are different. We don't burn it to the ground. We use subprime mortgage rates. So the question for me is it sufficient progress to have progressive law changes if they are not followed, while the second-class citizenry for blacks well into the 21st century it occurs. And when I say it still occurs, you can see it in COVID mortality rates. You know, blacks versus whites is proof of their second-class citizenry. The gross inequalities that still persist, that blacks are 13 or 14% of our population, yet possess 2 to 3% of its wealth. And meanwhile, the average black family has $840,000 less wealth than the average white family. So those things are basically the media. If I can just finish this last comment, is owned by the most wealthy, and they are masters of failing to reveal the real truth. Basically, when is progress really a lack of progress? So sorry to exceed my 2 minutes.
That's okay, Pedro. Thank you so much. Peter? You have to unmute.
I'm sorry I came in late. I had trouble figuring out how to find the Zoom room, so I really don't have anything to say at this point. But I will make sure I read those articles about the Oklahoma massacre.
Okay, thank you. Marva?
I had to leave for a little bit of the discussion, but I don't know if Senator Thurman came up in the discussion.
No.
Okay, he served as the governor of South Carolina from 1947 to 1951, and he was a senator from 1954 to 2003. And he had the black maid that was working in his house had 2 daughters for him, and named Essie Mae Washington and Juliana Gertrude Thurman. I don't understand how the last daughter has his name. I don't know, she may have changed her name in later life, but I don't think he had left them any inherited wealth. And he didn't leave their mama with a house, a property. He used that young woman. Her mother, from what I understand, she used to come in the house and help her mother. And then she, during the affair, she became the maid and replaced her mother. And the families, from what I can understand, they met up and they acknowledged her, the 2 girls, and they formed a relationship. And that was a long time for them to be acknowledged.
Okay, thank you, Marva.
A good article, Nancy.
I appreciate it, thank you. Kate?
Nancy, thank you for the article. Um, I'm glad that you brought to light the massacre that happened in Tulsa. I think part of the thing is that they gained wealth because the dollar circulated in their community several times, or quite a few times, before it moved out of the community itself. Um, and I think that uh, what happened was a lot of it was jealousy. This happened, I understand, during the Depression, and many of the whites were without jobs and they were suffering, and they were jealous of what was happening in the Black community because they were flourishing because of how the dollar moved in their community. Also, wanted to bring to light the fact that in today's community, Black men are jailed so that there's no head of the family, so to speak. They live in poverty. Then the Black community winds up in poverty because of that. And then they're deprived of a better education because of the areas they live in, because of the tax base. And also, Black communities in general, or the Black population in general, is deprived of generational wealth because of what came before. And lastly, I wanted to say that there are many massacres that happen. One in particular is Rosewood, also, where they destroyed the entire town, and all of that based on false information again as well. And I wanted to thank you again for the article, and it was very interesting.
Okay, thank you.
You're
You were
welcome.
on time. Okay, we're gonna move on. From now on, those were the 4 people that didn't get a chance to speak. I hope I didn't miss anybody. But from now on, if you would please take a minute for your wrap up, and we'll begin with Marion.
This is what I consider to be American history. It should be included in the history books, no matter how unpleasant it is. Every single human on this earth is flawed and imperfect. Unfortunately, there are some people who are more flawed and more imperfect than others. And by that, I mean to deliberately, intentionally cause significant harm to your fellow human beings is unforgivable. And I voiced this to several people this week that I told about this article. I said, this is an unforgivable. This is not a turn the other cheek event. It was totally unnecessary. This was a very timely article, and I think it's something that should be included in history books and not just in newspapers or other periodicals. Very timely article.
Thank you, Marion. Bill?
Great article. It had me thinking, my mother is buried in the family plot just outside Tulsa. And my mother grew up in a racist society. Most of her family were racist, but my mother was not racist. And unfortunately, she died when I was 18, because I wish I could go back and talk to her and said, how did you grow up in a racist society and not become a racist yourself? But I'll never be able to ask that question, but it's one I ponder. So again, great article, Nancy, and thanks.
Thank you. Lynn?
I read in a history book that when the people who wanted to secede from the Union and start the war against the Union were trying to enlist poor whites in their cause, they began creating a phobia against Black people. And one of the elements of that phobia was to say that our white women will be attacked by Black men. And it was successful in getting poor white men who had no interest in slavery to nevertheless join the cause. And it was used again during Reconstruction. This is why we have to have Jim Crow laws, because we've got to protect white women. So it's a very useful tool of propaganda. I'm glad we had this article and this discussion today. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. Cindy.
Valuable discussion. Eye-opening. It reminded me of something that happened when I was about 7 or 8, that I didn't even realize the importance of, which was a neighbor, well off, big farm, big house. It came out that she was involved with a man who worked for her who happened to be Black. And the commotion, again, as a kid, I was never told what actually happened. And it took years to figure out what all that commotion was about. But it was a sexual relationship between a white woman, well off, comfortable financially, and a Black man who worked for her. It's very sad that we're still there, I guess. Now, that was a long time ago because it was about 70 years ago, but we need to get past it. And I don't know how to, what? Reassure white men that they're valuable? Where does it go? It's discouraging.
Thank you, Cindy. Michelle?
Thank you for the article and the discussions. As usual, it's very informative, enlightening. And I just have to say that the history, there's much of the history that I don't know. I've been learning the past several years. And so I think one of the ways that we have to get past all this partially is to really buckle down and teach this history in schools to kids. And I'm really discouraged by the legislatures around this country. They're now trying to basically cut that out and legislate their way out of having to teach things like this. And the critical race theory thing is going on in Texas right now and has been passed, unfortunately. And we'll see what that does. I hope somebody gets in here and starts a lawsuit so that we can get rid of that. But it's just ridiculous. And so all of us here need to go and actually read what critical race theory is, because it's the opposite of what the conservatives think it is. So it's just ridiculous. Anyway, have a good weekend, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. Glenn? Glenn? You awake in there?
Oh, I appreciate what everybody have said, even those who disagree with me. I also appreciate what Kate said about how the money circulated in their community so many times, and that built up the wealth. And no matter how poor a community is, if they practice that, they will lift themselves up. And the media has a lot to do with how we view each other, and whether it directs our emotions. And now today, where they have so much media, they got Facebook, they got everything. You see how Trump has been declawed by not being able to use the media. So the media does affect how people feel against each other. That's it.
Thank you, Glenn. That's a good point. Very good point. Francis?
I want to thank Marva for bringing up Strom Thurmond. It didn't cross my mind, but can we say that maybe he was a deluded Thomas Jefferson of the age? But I do remember Strom Thurmond also, Marva. Thank you, Nancy. A great discussion, done a good leadership, and I second Michelle in saying have a good weekend.
You too, Francis. Thank you so much. Louise?
I totally agree with the other people that were saying it needs to be taught in schools. We've said this before, I've said it a million times, being an educator, our history books suck. They're full of lies and they're full of missing pieces that are very important. And our history books need to totally change. And that would definitely help a lot for our next generation. Darn it, I was going to say something else and I forgot. Oh yeah, the movie Birth of the Nation. I think it was Marion. I can't remember who was saying about. Um, Lynn. Yeah, that movie, The Birth of the Nation. My God, I mean that just portrayed black men as savage, oversexed, crazed murderers, right? I mean, geez, it started there with that movie and was perpetuated in all kinds of other things. So yeah, and again, back to the media. There you go. That was the media. Have a great weekend. Love you all.
All right, thank you, Louise. Phyllis?
So much more I'd like to say, but good article, which led to a really good discussion. And this will be posted on YouTube, which you can tell Shelly if she just wants to go to about an hour in, she can watch the rest of it.
Okay.
Nancy. And I'm just going to do the announcement now, and then I'm going to stop the recording. We are meeting next week on June 12th, and I'll be facilitating. And I'm stopping the recording. Oh, do you want me to leave it on for your wrap up?
Yeah, you can leave it on for my wrap up. And,
sorry.
then stop the recording.
Then I'll stop.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay. There were a couple of things, and Leonetta, you already went, right? So there were a couple of things that, throughout that I kind of wanted to comment on. That one, I think Francis brought this up about they didn't want statehood. Okay. It was true about the enslaved Africans, Black people were brought to Oklahoma with the Indians, and when they were freed and they were entitled to the land grants just like the indigenous people. So that is how they got their land initially. They did not want statehood because they were going to have the Jim Crow laws imposed on them in the American, the Southeast, the people coming from the Southeast to take advantage of the land grants were going to bring their Jim Crow and racist ways with them. So they didn't want statehood. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was segregation. In watching the documentaries, one of the reasons that you had such a prosperous Black community was because of segregation. They could not go downtown, and I've understood this is true here too on Canal Street. You couldn't try clothes on Canal Street, correct? Is that correct? So they had you, so you went to, where was it?
That's correct,
Dryad
Nancy.
Street? You went to Dryad Street, right?
Yes,
And
that's
where
correct.
they had the same situation in Tulsa. Greenwood Avenue was where they went, where all the retail facilities were located that Black people could go in and conduct business. So therefore, they had their own movie theaters, they had their own grocery stores, they had their own retail, their department stores, they had a hotel, they had everything because they were so segregated and could not use facilities in the white community. And so that was a major contributing factor to the prosperity of Greenwood. Now, today we don't have that. And when civil rights came in, as soon as you could afford to move out of the Black community, guess what? You moved. I mean, that's just what happened in the Black communities. Economic power has diminished over the years. I mean, we do need to get back to that, but we do need to come in with a different model, if that makes sense. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was the myth and the white woman, and that is just a white supremacist tactic, always has been and always will be. It permeates today. Still, as far as the loving relationship between Black men, and or I'll just say interracial relationships in general, regardless of whether it's a Black man and a white woman or a Black woman and a white man, I think it has to do with the attraction of the forbidden. You always want what you cannot have or you're not supposed to have. All right. I do think, I'm not saying that interracial relationships can't flourish and be genuine. I'm not saying that at all. Okay. Because if that were the case, you would not have had the Loving decision in 1967, where the man went to court to fight to be married to his Black wife. Okay. So, but I just think that is the main basis for interracial relationships in my experience, what I've seen. And then lastly, no, not lastly, the next to the last thing, like Leonetta, my family too had to flee in the middle of the night from Haleburg, Alabama. They were sharecroppers. And my great grandfather dared to question the weight of the cotton. They were trying to cheat him on the weight of the cotton, and he questioned it. And the Ku Klux Klan showed up. Well, he knew they were coming, so he got out of town before they could get him. They were going to lynch him. And he had to leave his family behind. He had to get out first, but they came to burn him out. And my great grandmother had to plead not to burn them out, which I guess she was successful because they didn't. But they all had to flee with whatever they had and move to Montclair and East Orange and Orange, New Jersey, in the Northeast. And that's how I came to grow up in New Jersey. And then lastly, this is the last thing. The next time I facilitate will be July 10th. And the other contributing factor to the Tulsa Massacre was the Second Amendment. The Black veterans came back from World War I, and they had firearms. But of course, I would assume living in Oklahoma at the time, it was still kind of like the Wild Wild West. You're going to have firearms. And so they were going to lynch Dick Rowland, and the Black veterans went down to the courthouse to protect him, and a white mob surrounded the courthouse and asked one of the Black veterans, "Boy, what you think you gonna do with that gun?" And he responded something to I'm not sure what he responded with. It was something, "I'll show you," or "It's none of your business." But anyway, he dared to speak back was the issue. And that is what set off the massacre. Okay, so it was 2 incidents. So anyway, the article that I initially thought about is about the Second Amendment and Black people, because the Second Amendment doesn't apply to Black people. You're not supposed to own guns, and you're certainly not supposed to use them to protect yourself. As a matter of fact, in the Jim Crow laws, there were laws that prohibited Black people from owning firearms in certain jurisdictions. And so therefore, it left Black people defenseless against the Ku Klux Klan, defenseless against racist mobs, just defenses, which is one of the reasons for the Great Migration to the North to escape the Jim Crow laws. So anyway, okay, now I've finished my wrap up. We can stop the recording.